November 1958, Sheridan, Wyoming. A hat shop on the north end of Main Street, a narrow building between a hardware store and a vacant lot that used to be a feed merchant. The sign above the door reads, "BELLOWS HATS EST, 1908. The paint has faded to the color of old bone. Inside, a man of 68 is standing at his workbench with a hat block in front of him, and nobody waiting for the hat. He has opened at 7 every morning for 50 years. He has opened at 7 this morning. The bell above the door is not rung in 14 days. Outside on the street, a man named Wayne has pulled his car to the curb and is reading the sign. He is between pictures, driving north, taking the back roads. A rancher in Cody told him 3 days ago, "If you want a hat made right, there's a man in Sheridan named Bellows." He wrote it down. He is looking at the sign now. Here is the story. Hank Bellows learned to make hats from his father, who learned from his father, who came to Wyoming with the cattle drives in 1882 and set up the first permanent hat shop between Cheyenne and the Montana line. 3 generations of the same bench, the same block, the same steam kettle that shapes the felt the way no machine has ever learned to shape it. Hank has made hats for ranchers and sheriffs and rodeo men, and one governor who came in without his security and left with a hat that fit his head exactly, which no hat ever had before. A hat takes 3 days. Not 3 days of constant work, but 3 days of knowing when the felt is ready for the block, when the block is ready for the brim, when the brim is ready to be set. You cannot hurry it. The felt tells you. Hank has been listening to felt for 50 years, and it has never lied to him. His wife Ruth died in the spring of 1955. She used to choose the hat bands, a particular shade of blue she called Wyoming sky, the exact color of the high country in October when the aspens are gone and the sky comes down close. Hank still orders the same ribbon from the same supplier in Denver. Every hat that leaves his shop has Wyoming sky around the crown. He has never told a customer what the color means. It is not their information. His grandson Tommy is 14 years old and has been spending his summers at the bench since he was 11. He can block a brim. He can set a sweatband. His stitching is still uneven, but it is getting less uneven, and that is what matters. Hank watches his hands sometimes the way a man watches something he is trying to pass along before the window closes. Tommy's father, Hank's son Carl, has been talking about putting Tommy in a manufacturing apprenticeship in Casper. Good wages, steady work, real future. Carl is not wrong about the wages. He is not wrong about the steady. What he does not understand, and what Hank has not found the right words to explain, is what gets lost when the last pair of hands stops. Please press the hype button on your phone to support my videos and me. The factory hats have been coming for 10 years. $8 at the dry goods store, machine blocked, machine stitched, all the same, all the same, all the same. A Bellows hat costs $45 and takes 3 days and fits the head it was made for and will last 30 years if you treat it right. The men who understand this still come. There are fewer of them every season. 14 days ago, the last one came, an old sheep rancher from the Bighorn foothills named Clarence Webb, 81 years old, who had been buying from Hank for 40 years. He came in on a Tuesday morning and set his old hat on the counter and said he needed a new one. He sat in the customer chair while Hank measured his head, and they talked about the weather and the sheep, and a man they both knew who had died in the summer. When the hat was finished, Clarence Webb put it on and looked in the mirror and said, "That's the last one. Make it count." Hank had made it count. He always made it count. But he understood what Clarence meant, and the bell had not rung since. This morning a letter came from Roy Hicks, who owns the building. 30 days notice. A clothing chain from Denver wants the space. They will pay 3 times Hank's rent. Roy Hicks is not a bad man. He has a mortgage of his own. The letter was apologetic in the way that letters are apologetic when the decision has already been made. Hank read the letter at the bench. He folded it once. He set it beside his tools, the blocking hammer and the brim iron and the stitching all, laid out left to right the way his father taught him, the way his grandfather had laid them out on a bench in 1882. He looked at the tools for a while. Then he got up and put the kettle on because the kettle was what you did when you did not know what else to do. He was standing at the kettle when the bell above the door rang. The man who came in was large, with a canvas jacket and a tan Stetson that had seen considerable weather. He stood in the doorway a moment, reading the shop, the hat blocks on the wall, the finished hats on their stands, the tools laid out on the bench, the steam kettle, the old man beside it. He said, "I'm looking for Bellows." Hank said, "You found him." The man came in. He moved through the shop the way people move through shops when they actually know what they're looking at. Slowly, without rushing toward anything, letting the things speak. He picked up a finished hat from its stand and turned it in his hands. He looked at the stitching. He looked at the band. Wyoming sky, the October color. He set his thumb inside the crown and felt the shape of the block. He set it back on the stand. He said, "The rancher in Cody was right." Hank looked at him. He had been looking at the man since he walked in, the way you look at a face you have seen somewhere you cannot place. He placed it now. He said nothing. Men of his generation did not make a fuss. The man said, "I need a hat, a working hat, not a picture hat, something that fits." He looked at Hank. "I've been wearing the wrong size for 20 years because nobody's measured my head right." Hank said, "Sit down." He got his measuring tape. He measured the man's head in 4 places the way his father had taught him. Circumference, front to back, ear to ear, temple to temple. He wrote the numbers in his order book. He looked at them. He said, "You've been wearing a size too small on the sides and a 1/4 inch too high in the front. That's why your hats never sit right after a day's wear." The man looked at him. He said, "How long have you known that about people's heads?" Hank said, 50 years. He paused. "Long enough to know that nobody's head is what they think it is. And I'm telling you, this actually happened." The man sat in the customer chair while Hank made notes and pulled felt samples. They talked about hats and horses and the particular problem of a hat that fits in the morning and loosens by afternoon. The man knew what he was talking about. He had spent 30 years working in hats for the camera, and he knew the difference between a hat that looked right and a hat that was right. At some point, the man's eye went to the shelf above the lamp line. High up, set apart from the others, sat a single hat under a cloth. Older than anything else in the shop. Set the way you set a thing you cannot sell and cannot put away. He said, "What's that one?" Hank was quiet for a moment. He said, "That one's not for sale." The man said, "Tell me about it anyway." Hank got the short ladder and brought the hat down. He set it on the stand and lifted the cloth. It was pale gray felt, gone soft with age, with a band the color of Wyoming sky in October. The first band Ruth had ever chosen, years before she knew what the color would come to mean. The brim was set with the particular roll that Hank's father had favored, a deep front curl that shed rain and kept the sun off without tipping forward. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. Inside the crown, in Hank's father's handwriting, a name. The man leaned in and read it. He went very still. The name was Tom Mix, the silent film star, the original cowboy of the American screen, the man who had sold 20 million tickets before talkies came, the man who had shown a generation of boys what a cowboy was supposed to look like, upright, clean, the white hat meaning something, the man who had died in 1940 and taken a whole era with him, the man whose posters had been on the wall of a young boy's bedroom in Winterset, Iowa in 1916. The man who had taught John Wayne, long before Harry Carey taught him anything, that a cowboy stood straight. Hank said, "My father made it in 1922. Mix came through Sheridan with a Wild West show. Wanted a hat made to his head, not a costume hat. Said he was tired of wearing hats that didn't fit." He paused. "Sound familiar?" The man did not answer. He was still looking at the name in the crown. Hank said, "He wore it in 3 pictures. After he died, his manager sent it back. Said it ought to come home to the hands that made it." The man stood with both hands on the brim of the hat, not picking it up, just holding the stand. He had been 12 years old when Tom Mix died. He had been 25 years into a career built on everything Mix had stood for, The clean hero, the straight back, the hat that meant something. He said, "Your father made this." Hank said, "And I've been keeping it since. You can't make a man like that up." The man straightened. He looked at the letter on the bench. Roy Hicks's letter, folded once, lying beside the tools. He looked at Tommy's unfinished practice hat on the side table, the stitching still uneven but getting less so. He picked it up. He turned it in his hands the way he had turned the finished hat when he first walked in, slowly, letting it speak. He felt the stitching with his thumb. He said, "Who's learning?" Hank said, "My grandson, 14. Summer's here." The man set the hat back down carefully. He said, "His father know he's good?" Hank looked at him. He said, "His father wants to send him to a factory in Casper." The man was quiet for a moment. He looked at the hat. He looked at Hank. He said, "What would it take to keep this shop open?" Hank shook his head. "It's not the money, I told you. Nobody wants a 3-day hat anymore. A shop needs work or it isn't a shop." The man looked at him. He said, "I've got a picture starting in March. 40 riders. Every one of them needs a hat that fits." Hank stared at him. The man said, "Not costume hats, working hats, your hats. I'll write it into the wardrobe order tonight." Hank said, he counted, "That's 40 hats." The man said, "At least." He looked at Tommy's practice hat. "You'll need help." He paused. "That boy, he any good?" Hank said, "He will be." The man picked up Tommy's practice hat and turned it in his hands. He felt the stitching, uneven, honest, the stitching of someone learning. He set it back down. He said, "A thing doesn't die while someone's still learning it." He settled his old Stetson on his head, the wrong size, too small on the sides, a 1/4 inch too high in the front, 20 years of the wrong hat. He looked at Hank. He said, "You measure me right. Make it right. I'll wear it in the picture." He left an order, not a check, a real order on paper, with a delivery address in California and a production company name and 40 hats listed by type. He left his card with a phone number for the wardrobe department. He left the shop. The bell rang once behind him. That's the part that gets me every time. We put everything into these stories. The hype button is how you tell us to keep going. Hank stood at the bench for a long time after. He looked at the order. He looked at Tom Mix's hat on the stand with the cloth pulled back. He looked at the tools laid out left to right the way his father had laid them. Then he put his hand on the stitching awl, the oldest tool on the bench, his grandfather's, brought from nowhere to Wyoming in 1882, and he held it for a moment. Then he picked up his pencil and began calculating felt. The wire came from California the next morning confirming the order. The morning after that, Tommy came in early without being asked and sat down at the side bench and picked up the stitching awl and went back to his practice. Hank watched him for a moment. He did not say anything. He turned back to his own bench and began blocking the first of 40 hats. Roy Hicks extended the lease in December. He did not explain why. Hank did not ask. The cavalry picture came out in the spring of 1959. Across America, men sat in dark theaters and watched 40 riders cross a river in hats that fit their heads exactly. Nobody knew the name of the man who blocked every one, but the hats were up there on the screen, and they were right. Tommy Bellows opened his own shop in Sheridan in 1971. He still uses the same steam kettle. He still orders Wyoming sky ribbon from the same supplier in Denver, though he had to find a new one when the original closed. Every hat that leaves his shop has that band. He has never told a customer what the color means. Hank Bellows worked at his bench until he was 87. When he passed, Tommy hung one hat on the wall where no one could buy it. The pale gray one, the name in the crown in an old man's handwriting. The brim set with the deep front curl that shed rain and kept the sun off. It is still there. Still with us? Hit hype. It tells us this story found the right people. The morning light comes through the window of Tommy Bellows' shop every day and crosses that hat on the wall. The pale gray felt, the October band, the name in the crown. It stays for a while. Then it moves on. If this story reached you, do me a favor, pass it on. Share it with someone who still does it the slow way. There are more stories coming.